Hello. My name is Jasmine Miller, and I serve as a leadership assistant to the Serembets Institute for Women's Leadership, Social Responsibility, and Global Awareness. It is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Dr. Volha Charnysh. Dr. Charnysh is a Cottey alumna, and she graduated from Cottey in 2007. She received her Associate of Arts and Associate of Science, and then went on to receive her bachelor degree from Smith College and PhD in Government from Harvard University. Dr. Charnysh is now an assistant professor of political science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She is currently writing a book that covers the long-term effects of forced migration in Poland and Germany in World War II. Dr. Charnysh's visit is made possible through the Alice Virginia Coffin Enrichment Fund. This fund was presented by the Cottey College Board of Trustees by Massachusetts PEO members in recognition of the Coffin family origin on Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. Dr. Charnysh will present Becoming a Global Citizen. Following her remarks, audience members will have time to ask questions. As you listen, please use your program to take notes and begin thinking of questions you would like to ask. Now please help me welcome Dr. Volha Charnysh.
Hi everyone, it's fantastic to be back, to see some familiar faces in the room. Thanks all for inviting and welcoming me to Cottey. So, I will tell you where I'm from. Do you see that little red star in the top left corner of the map? It is hard to imagine, but my great-grandparents lived in 3 different countries without ever leaving their small plot of land. Borders simply shifted around them. They were born in the Russian Empire, but after World War I, they suddenly found themselves in independent Poland. And 20 years and 2 occupation regimes later, they were suddenly citizens of the Soviet Union. Each border shift around them was a product of violent conflict. They lost their loved ones, their property, and also their freedom and dignity in the process. Borders around them were drawn in arbitrary ways, but being on the wrong side of the border for everyone involved carried tremendous consequences. The Soviet Union is also where I was born. At the age of 2, though, I was suddenly a citizen of independent Belarus, this red country in the center of Europe that you see on the map. Just like my grandparents, again, I had no agency in this transition of my nation state. But this transition profoundly shaped my future. This is what the legal scholar Alet Shachar calls the birthright lottery. By sheer chance, some of us are born into affluent democratic states. Where we're born determines how long we live and how well we live. So Shachar compares this to property inheritance. And I think she's right. For those Americans in the room, raise your hand. Great. So congratulations, because you won the birthright lottery. You've been lucky since the very day you were born. But fortunately for all of us who are not Americans, and also for Americans who want to have a little bit more out of their life, there is one type of citizenship that we all have some agency over, and it is global citizenship. Unlike national citizenship, global citizenship is available to all, though not all of us may decide to exercise it. So I understand global citizenship as awareness of the interdependence of individuals in the wider world, and as an exercise of freedoms and responsibilities that follow from it. And so today I will talk to you a little bit about how I gradually became a global citizen and why it matters to me so much. And perhaps I can inspire some of you to do the same. Now, it all started with learning a foreign language. And here you see me in school in Belarus in 2nd grade, at the very last desk. My parents did not speak English. They grew up during Cold War in the Soviet Union, and they never traveled abroad. But they really believed that I should learn it. And so my dad, who was a big fan of Western culture, would help me with my English homework, trudging through unfamiliar pronunciation of English words. Now, I became more passionate about English later on in middle school on my own, because my inspiration came from the one and only Brad Pitt. He spoke English, and I felt that I had to learn it. Right? Now, the first American I communicated with was not Brad Pitt, of course, but a pen pal from Ocala, Florida. When I was 12, I signed up for a service that connected kids in Belarus to kids in English-speaking countries. And we became pen pals. It took many months for his letters to arrive. This was before internet and email. And when they did, my dad and I would translate them together and slowly work on our response. We would send some photographs, and it was all around exciting experience. And my effort to learn English early on paid off. In 2003, I was selected to be one of 20 Belarusian teenagers to spend the year at an American high school. The program was sponsored by the US State Department, and the goal of this unique exchange program for high school students was to repair the damage done by the Cold War and to build bridges between people in post-Soviet countries and people in the United States. I was really fortunate, though I didn't realize it at the time, because just 2 years later, the program was shut down. It was one of many casualties of diplomatic tensions between the United States and Belarus over the treatment of Belarusian opposition and the lack of human rights and political freedoms in Belarus. But at age 15, I boarded a plane for the first time and embarked on a year-long adventure, living with a family in rural Delaware. Here you see me boarding a plane next to my little brother who stayed in Belarus. My time in Delaware enriched my life in many ways, but practically speaking, attending a US high school gave me the know-how of applying to a US college. When I returned back to Belarus, I finished high school there, and I took English language test and the SAT and started filling out college application forms. Now, at that time, Belarus' annual household income was just $2,000. It was barely enough for 2 round-trip tickets to the United States. That effectively shut the door to all of the colleges I applied for, except one, Cottey College. Without the support of Cottey College, without the generous funding offer I received, I would not be here talking to you today. I would not be at MIT either. I also received kind support from a family of another exchange student who stayed with me in Delaware. He came from Hamburg, Germany. His family knew next to nothing about me, and they have never met me in person, but they were kind enough to pay the remaining balance for my first semester at Cottey. Now, in my application to Cottey College, I said I wanted to make the world a better place. But to be honest, what I really wanted was to graduate, find a well-paying job, and maybe stay in the United States for good. So, in other words, I did not plan on becoming a global citizen at the time. I really only wanted to correct my national citizenship. I felt I deserved to be a citizen of a country that gives me opportunities to pursue my dreams. And even today, I believe that before we can contribute to making the world a better place, we need to put ourselves in the right place first. So to cover some of my tuition, I was assigned a campus job, and on orientation day, I learned that I would be working at Cottey's Public Information Office. I had an interest in journalism, so it was very exciting, and I was hoping that I would be writing. Instead, my main task was to read obituaries. So yes, biographies of the dead. I went through paper copies of the Kansas City Star, Nevada Daily Mail, and when I spotted a Cottey alum, I would cut it out, cut the obituary out, and glue it to A4 paper, write a date stamp on the page. So hopefully this job no longer exists today. But when I was done with my obituaries, I would often flip to the cartoon page. And cartooning was what my real passion was at the time. Cottey College's Spectrum was a great outlet with no holds barred. Through my drawings, I commented on everything from serious political issues like US politics after 9/11 to the realities of life at an all-girls college. All-women's college. So one reason why I liked cartoons is that they would hide my accent. My trouble with A's and they's on the page of cartoons was less obvious. And of course, my Cottey friends and sweet mates eagerly posed for my drawings and had the good sense to never tell me when my jokes weren't funny. So when I was not reading obituaries and I was not cartooning, I was studying. Incredulously rich offerings at Cottey College made me so excited that I signed up for 7 to 8 courses per semester. Ballet, piano, calculus, computer science, journalism, you name it, I was probably doing it. I also picked up another foreign language, German. I threw myself into extracurriculars too, joining Pi Theta Kappa, the international club, the business club. Outside Cottey, I did some babysitting. I also covered Sunday nursery school for one of the local churches. I met many great people from the Nevada community. At least one of them, Sandy, my host mom, is in this room. So I'm very grateful for all the help I received from her through my 2 years at Cottey, and I'm so happy that we still keep in touch. Thanks, Sandy. So when I look back at all those years, I'm amazed that I was able to do all those things and to study hard and to work and to do all the extracurricular activities and stay awake. I think this is because of all the terrible coffee and vending machines on campus, especially in the basement of the PEO hall where I lived. And so let's just say today I'm a much more health-conscious global citizen. And I encourage all of you students to be as well. So on a more serious note, my 2 years at Cottey and my subsequent experiences at Smith, Harvard, and eventually MIT have given me a cause to reflect on my identity and on my passport. So last December, 16 years since I first came to the United States, I finally became a naturalized American citizen. I now have a passport that enables me to travel anywhere I would like. And for the first time in my life, I was able to choose my citizenship. But the irony is living through all of this time in the US also really changed how I view my identity and my home country in the first place. So I view this evolution in stages, and I'll try to walk you through some of them because I think they apply to all of us, even those who live at home and do not move abroad like me. So at stage 1, I was still fresh off the boat, and I started out with hyper-awareness of cultural differences. Every second person I spoke to had no idea where Belarus was, and also could not necessarily understand my heavy accent. And so I would cling proudly to my national identity, to my Belarusianness. I was very proud of where I came from, and I thought my country was the best in the world. I frequently noted that Marc Chagall, a master of classic avant-garde art, came from Belarus, not France. He's Belarusian. I would also sometimes tell people that Belarus was one of 3 countries in the world that voluntarily relinquished its nuclear arsenal in the 1990s. But what happens eventually is that pride gives way to realization to all things that are wrong with my home country. So about a year into my time at Cottey, I stopped telling people about Marc Chagall, and instead I would tell them that Belarus is this tiny country in the middle of Europe that is called Europe's last dictatorship. This is a country where the government restricts freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And here you see a cartoon on the subject that I drew later. Some time later, a friend and I also founded a website called Belarus Digest. This was our attempt to comment on Belarusian politics in English, to share information about our home country with people abroad who knew next to nothing about Belarus, and to provide a neutral and what we believed was objective look at activities and politics in Belarus. So far away from home, I could afford to write and to say things that, if done in Belarus, would have gotten me and my family in trouble. Today, Belarus Digest continues to be a vibrant website filled with stories and cartoons by people who are Belarusians living abroad all over the world. So if you ever want to know more about Belarus, check out the website. So eventually, I entered a sort of stage 3 in my evolution as a global citizen. As you start out tethered to your home country, no matter whether you live abroad or whether you stayed at home, you eventually realize that the world is a bigger place. What this means is that things that are wrong with your country, be it authoritarian government, economic inequality, racism, or environmental degradation, actually plague many other places in the world. And you can learn how to fix these problems from people in other countries, or at least by observing other countries, you can better understand what causes these problems. And so this realization inspired me to pursue political science. And after graduating from Cottey, I transferred to Smith College, where I majored in government. I wrote an honors thesis on nuclear proliferation. This was inspired by my origin in Belarus, the country that relinquished nuclear arsenals. And in 2010, I took my passion for international security to Harvard University, where I enrolled in a long 7-year PhD program in government. Now, I was a top student in high school and in college, and when I came to Harvard, I felt really challenged. I was no longer the best in my class, no matter how hard I worked. Everybody around me seemed to have come from an elite university and seemed so much more well-traveled, so much more well-spoken and cosmopolitan than I was. Was I really in the right place? Did I really belong to Harvard? All of these questions kept running through my mind. So now I know that what I was experiencing was impostor syndrome, and of course 3 in 4 Americans suffer from it at some point in their lives, and young women, like many of you in this room, are particularly likely to experience impostor syndrome. Now, through it all, it's important to maintain passion for things you really do. In my case, it was political science, and also identify some strategies for dealing with adversity. So maybe my lessons will be helpful to you. I think one element is to, of course, realize that others also feel this way, even though outwardly they might seem very successful and very confident, even if they really hide it well. And the second step is appreciating how far you have come. We all started in different places, and so the difficulties we experience often really come from the different journeys that we all had to get to where we are. Now, in graduate school, I also decided to travel as much as I could. I could finally do this because Harvard offered funding and also letters for visas, which I needed to travel. So every summer, I would seek out a new country and try to justify being there with research purposes. So I studied German in Berlin, I interviewed military and political leaders in Moscow, Georgia, and Moldova, and eventually I spent up to 2 years in Poland doing research in the archives on forced migration. So education really opened borders for me. And 7 years later, I think I've reached yet another stage in my evolution toward becoming a global citizen. As a professor of political science at MIT, I have an opportunity to inspire and help students who are going through some of the same challenges that I did as a student. They all come from different places in the world, their identities are changing, they're trying to understand how to navigate this foreign country that they are in, or this new foreign university that they're in. And so it's fascinating to watch it and to also realize just how common these problems are to all of us, no matter where we come from. So the research I do now also has a lot to do with where I came from and where I grew up. I'm writing a book about the consequences of forced migration in the aftermath of the Second World War. So in the late 1940s, nearly 20 million people were uprooted from their homes, and they had to be resettled elsewhere. This population movement rivals the scale of transatlantic slave trade that took place over many centuries, but in the European case, it took place within about 5 years. And so learning more about this issue, I've realized that my great-grandparents were actually the lucky ones because they stayed put through all these transformations and border changes, even as their neighbors and friends were expelled from their home because of their ethnicity, because they had the wrong identity from the perspective of the political environment at the time. So what I learned so far in my research is actually that even traumatic experiences such as displacement and uprooting and even genocide can eventually lead to positive outcomes. So in the area of Poland that I study, people who were uprooted and lost all of their possessions actually wound up investing in human capital for their children. So losing all of their belongings actually taught them that education is one thing that can really travel with them. I also find that places where people were resettled and came from many different regions are economically more successful today. Why is that? Because coming from different cultures makes our skills more complementary to each other. And research actually shows that teams that perform well on problem-solving tasks are not necessarily teams where members come from where all members in aggregate have highest skills, highest IQ, and so on, but where there's enough diversity in skills and experiences and even IQ levels, because that's when complementarity really kicks in. So these two lessons apply to all of us in this room. In particular, education and knowledge can give all of us more mobility and more options. Now, by education here, I don't necessarily mean a diploma. The diplomas also can really help. I mean that you want to learn new things, you want to become an informed and critical citizen of your own home country as well as of the wider world. You also want to take time to meet people who grew up in different circumstances or in different places from you. You will learn a lot from them, not just about the places where they come from, not just about their culture, but you'll also understand your own culture and your own place better. And you really will also want to welcome others into your community. You want to keep the door open no matter where people come from. So I want to leave you with a little scene. At my naturalization ceremony, which you have a picture on the slide there, in December, at a town hall in downtown Boston, I stood alongside 300 people coming from over 90 different countries, and together we all had to pledge allegiance to the United States of America and promise to surrender our past loyalties. But I imagine that for most people in that room, obtaining a US passport was actually a step toward becoming citizens of the world. To be in that room, they first had to travel across hundreds or thousands of miles. They had to take many risks. They had to work very hard, and they finally had to learn English as well as US history and culture. That's on the test for naturalization. We all had to learn it. So they now actually have, as a result of this journey, a lot more than one citizenship, a lot more than one loyalty, and I believe that there's really nothing wrong with that. So we're all connected, and in addition to rights and duties to just one country, we have freedoms and responsibilities to all humans around the globe. Now, what are these freedoms and responsibilities? Well, now we're so connected that we can share ideas, music, textbooks, antibiotics with pretty much every human of the more than 6 billion people around the world. But just as easily, we could share viruses, we could share pollution, we could disrupt markets abroad, we could imperil someone's livelihoods. And we all know that what happens in one corner of the globe really reverberates, often in unexpected, in unanticipated ways, far, far away. So there is a tremendous responsibility that comes with becoming a global citizen too. And it's very important to remember in the age where we might be trying to build new borders and new barriers between each other. So I hope that instead of building new borders, we can actually build bridges. to connect with other people around the globe. So you have all it takes to become citizens of the world, and whether and how you exercise this choice, I believe, depends on you alone, but I do hope that you do exercise this choice and become global citizens. Thank you very much for coming here, and I look forward to your questions.
Is your family still in Belarus?
Yes, my family is still in Belarus. My little brother is about to graduate from university with a degree in computer science. And I visit them once a year or so, sometimes twice a year. They've come to the US once for my wedding. So.
What got you started in thinking about the exodus out in Poland and other places?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think actually, even though I come from that region, what got me started is being in the US and reading about World War II and understanding just what different things I learned about the same conflict in the United States and abroad, for me in Belarus. And so, strikingly, even though my hometown, which is now 100% Belarusian, was actually 80% Polish and Jewish, I did not really know about this. No one around you talks about these things. And so I only learned it in graduate school by learning more about the region from English-speaking books. And so kind of seeing that, trying to understand how such huge population turnover could occur and why no one's really discussing it and thinking about it got me started on doing research about the region, and I discovered so many parallels to my background in the process.
So do you feel hopeful about the future of people as they become global citizens?
Yes, I feel very much hopeful. I think that we are living at the time of unprecedented rise in education and prosperity around the world, even though it's very much easier to focus on all the problems we have, right? So a lot of the UN developmental goals, for example, have been achieved in the last 10 years. All of us around the globe are learning the same languages and are able to communicate. We live in a time of unprecedented population movements again. You could look at, the student body of many of US universities, despite the recent drop, in the last few years in the number of international students. Just comparing the student bodies in different places suggests that they're becoming more international. So, I believe as people learn more about each other, are more connected, travel more, I think that it will bring some change in the way we approach things. I think it's, one challenge is that for the longest time in history, we were kind of members of tribes and lived in a very small place, communicating just with people around us. So the world has been globalizing, but only in the last 200 years. And many other, thousands of years, it was not. So I think it takes a little bit of time for our mindsets to adapt. But I believe they will. Yes?
My first one is, what advice do you have for students who have lost their motivation for pursuing, studies due to internal or external forces?
Mm-hmm. So, so first of all, I guess every one of us feels demotivated sometimes, right? So not punishing yourself for it and realizing that there will be times when you will not be able to get out of bed can help. Treat it as less of a, final stage in your development and more of as a phase, right? And two, I just think that, realizing that whatever difficulties you have that got you to be demotivated will actually be easier to overcome once you have invested in education. Maybe that can bring motivation a little bit. Because again, certainly getting a good degree and working hard does not translate directly into, being successful and getting everything you want out of life, but it makes that much, much, much more likely than not doing any of those things, right?
And my second question is, since you've traveled and studied and researched in so many different countries, what advice do you have for students who are going on a trip to Poland and Germany? What would you like us to be aware of when we're there, since we're outsiders?
Mm-hmm. Great. So, great question. So first of all, I'll tell you an anecdote that might scare you a little, but it will come from me as a Cottey student coming to Paris. That's where our spring break abroad was taking place. So I had a wonderful time in Paris. All of us were very happy. For me, it was the first time I could really travel in Western Europe. And we all came really prepared for our cultural experience. But the one thing I remember the most from that trip is that when we just got there, in our very first day, tired from the airport, and we sat at a French cafe, there was this crazy person who might have been inebriated, who said, "You damn Americans, go eat your McDonald's," all right? And so, I was debating whether to put this story in my slides, but now that you asked, the irony is this was maybe, 1 minute of the 7-day experience in France, but somehow I just cannot forget it, and all of us who were in that cafe at the time probably cannot, right? So this is not going to happen to you guys, because times are changing, and also you're going to fun places, and it's also not going to happen because you're coming prepared. You have learned a lot about Germany and Poland, and you're all very educated young women from Cottey College. But I think it's something that is almost a lesson to how to treat other people when they visit your home country, right? And something to kind of remember as you're entering the real world that is not as warm and fuzzy as Cottey College, right? So now let me turn this into a positive message. So the positive message, how to make this a great experience, right? So my advice is always to learn a little bit of the language of the country you're going to. Now, everybody in Germany and Poland, if you're going to big cities, will speak English. And, but you want to actually reach out to people in their home language, no matter the accent, no matter not being fluent in it, no matter if it's just one sentence that you have learned in your Step into the World class. Because speaking a shared language signals more than just understanding each other. It's not really trying to translate from one to the other. It signals trust, it signals respect for other people's culture, and it signals the membership in some of the shared community. So even if you say that one phrase in German when you're in Munich and people respond to you in English because they speak English and they want to welcome you, I think that can really change your experience in the country you're coming to. And I guess have a great time, enjoy. Reach out to Germans, because it's all too easy to just come in a group of students and hang out with people you went to college with. Ask questions. People love to help when you ask questions. They do not like when you presume things about them, but when you reach out and ask for their guidance, they get very happy to help. And so do more of that, despite getting worried about language skills, feeling intimidated in an unfamiliar place, and feeling jet-lagged from coming from the United States. So I guess that's the general positive advice. Yes?
We are living in a highly polarized world, and we are living in our echo chambers, so we are actively trying to
disagree with anything that is not in tune with what we believe in. So as an educator in your classrooms, how do you help students engage in a civil conversation where they are respecting each other and, more importantly, listening to a perspective that is distinct from what they believe?
Right. So I guess I start by teaching students about mutual respect, right? And I tell them to be patient with each other. And I also tell them to not be afraid of things they don't understand, right? Because I think some of the difficult interactions in the classroom come from maybe misunderstanding what other people are saying, or let's say if other people are talking a foreign language you can't understand, feeling excluded, or feeling like they're talking about you even though that's not true in 90% of cases, right? So I tell them to respect, understand, be patient, and I tell them to put themselves in other people's shoes, right? I think that helps a lot, especially when you meet people from different backgrounds. You know, instead of wondering why they are so different and why they do things the way they do, and getting upset over the way they do things, if those things are different, I would ask yourself what you would do if you had, again, if you had their journey, if your English was different, if you came from a different country, and how you would bridge those things, right? So I try to do this. I do a lot of group activities in class also on a more practical note, and I get students to engage with one another already immediately. So by the end of the semester, they often become friends. So. All right, thanks. You've been a great audience. I hope some of you are inspired, and I'm glad to be back. Hi.
Please help me thank Dr. Volha Charnysh for sharing her inspiring story and advice. Thank you for being here. For attendance purposes, all audience members, please complete the survey using the QR code on your program. Scan the QR code using Snapchat, an iPhone reader, or a QR code app. Your completed survey will track your attendance for any required classes or extra credit. The survey will be open for the next 20 minutes. Thank you for your attendance.